The lobby security camera had a 6-second delay. I knew that because I'd read every inch of my building's safety disclosure when I moved in 3 years ago. So when the front desk called up to my apartment at 7:42 on a Tuesday morning and said my parents were downstairs asking to be let up, I had exactly 6 seconds after I hung up the phone to decide what version of myself I was going to be. I decided to be the version who already knew everything. "Send them up," I said. And then I set my coffee on the counter, walked to my desk drawer, and pulled out a manila folder I hadn't opened in 11 months. If your family showed up unannounced at your door after 7 years of silence, asking you to help them cover up a federal crime, would you let them in? That's not a hypothetical. That's the exact situation I found myself in on an ordinary Tuesday in March. And the answer I gave that morning changed everything. My name is not important. What's important is that I left home at 17 with a duffel bag, $40 in cash, and a scar along my left forearm that my brother put there with a box cutter when I was 15. What's important is that my parents watched it happen. And when I came downstairs the next morning with my arm wrapped in a dish towel still stained rust brown, my mother looked at me and said, "You know how your brother gets when you push him." I want you to sit with that sentence for a second. You know how your brother gets when you push him. I had done nothing except walk into the kitchen to get a glass of water. My brother had been arguing on the phone with someone about money. It was always about money with him, and when I accidentally knocked his notebook off the counter, he turned around and dragged the box cutter across my arm like I was a piece of cardboard he was trying to open. And somehow, according to my mother, I had pushed him. My father didn't say anything at all. He just picked up his newspaper and turned the page. I spent 2 years after that walking on eggshells in my own home, shrinking myself into corners, eating dinner before my brother got home, showering at 5 in the morning so I wouldn't be in the hallway when he came out of his room. I became an expert at being invisible. And then, the summer I turned 17, I came home from my part-time job at the pharmacy to find my savings account empty. Not low. Empty. $4,283 that I had been saving since I was 12 years old. Birthday money and Christmas checks and every shift I'd ever worked, gone. Transferred out in 3 separate transactions over the course of a single afternoon. I knew immediately who had done it. The bank statement was sitting on the kitchen table like my brother had left it there on purpose, which I think he had. My parents were seated on either side of it, and when I walked in, my mother said, "He needed it more than you did right now. You can save again." I was 17 years old. I looked at that bank statement for a long time. I looked at my parents. And then I went upstairs, packed a bag, and I left. I want to be honest with you about what the next few years looked like, because it wasn't clean or triumphant or cinematic. I slept on my friend Donna's couch for 3 weeks until her parents asked me to leave. I worked 2 jobs through my senior year of high school, renting a room from an older woman named Carol who charged me $200 a month and left casseroles outside my door without ever asking for anything in return. I graduated. I applied for every scholarship I could find. I got into a state school on a combination of grants, loans, and the kind of determined rage that either destroys a person or propels them forward. I chose forward. I got a degree in accounting. Then I got a second certification in forensic auditing, because somewhere in the back of my mind, in the place where I stored everything I couldn't say out loud, I think I always knew that understanding how money moves was the one language my family had ever truly spoken. I got a job at a mid-size firm in the city. I built a life that was quiet and entirely my own. I had a good apartment, a good therapist, 2 houseplants I had somehow kept alive for 3 years, and a rule: my family did not exist in this life. I had not spoken to my parents in 7 years. I had not spoken to my brother in 10. And then they walked into my lobby on a Tuesday morning. My mother looked smaller than I remembered. She was wearing a beige cardigan I didn't recognize and carrying a purse she held in front of her with both hands like a shield. My father's hair had gone fully gray. He stood slightly behind her, which was a new thing. He had always been the one who entered rooms first. They both stopped when they saw me standing in my apartment doorway, and for a long moment nobody said anything. "You look well," my mother finally said. I didn't say anything back. "Can we come in?" she asked. I stepped aside and let them in. I did not hug them. I did not offer them coffee. I stood in the middle of my living room with my arms at my sides and I waited. My father sat down on my sofa without being invited. My mother remained standing near the door. And then my father said, "Your brother is in some trouble." There it was. I want to describe to you the specific quality of silence that followed that sentence. It was the kind of silence that has weight. I could feel it pressing against the inside of my chest, pushing up against something I had spent years carefully reinforcing. I had always known, somewhere deep and certain, that this was eventually how it would go. That the only reason they would ever come back was because they needed something from me. That the prodigal daughter story only gets told in one direction, and it was never going to be mine. "What kind of trouble?" I said. Not a question. A statement. My father looked at my mother. My mother looked at her purse. My father said, "He's been managing the finances at Hartwell and Associates for the past 4 years." I knew the name. Regional construction firm, mid-sized, solid reputation. I had actually seen their name in a trade publication maybe 8 months ago. He may have made some errors, my father said. How large? I said. Another look between them. The auditors are saying $260,000, my mother said quietly. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. The way my therapist had taught me for moments when the ground shifts under your feet and you need to remind your nervous system that you are still standing. They haven't filed charges yet, my father said. His voice was picking up something now, urgency, maybe, or rehearsal. Like he was delivering lines he had practiced in the car. The company is doing an internal review first. If someone with the right credentials were to go over the records before the external auditors complete their report, someone who knew what to look for, someone who could perhaps. You want me to falsify an audit, I said. We want you to help your family, my mother said, and her voice broke on the last word in a way that I recognized from my entire childhood. That specific fracture in her voice that had always made me feel responsible for things that were never my fault. I noticed it this time. I noticed it, and I named it in my head, and I let it sit there without acting on it. He has a family, my mother continued. He has 2 children. If he goes to prison, he has 2 children, I said. How old are they? She blinked. 6 and 8. I was 15, I said, when he held a box cutter to my arm. I was 17 when he emptied my bank account. His children are going to be fine. Children survive difficult things. I know that for a fact. My father's jaw tightened. We didn't come here to relitigate the past. No, I said. You came here to ask me to commit a federal crime. I understand the distinction. You would be protecting your family, he said. You are not my family, I said. And I said it quietly, without heat, the way you state something that is simply true. The sky is blue. Water is wet. These people are not my family. You stopped being my family when you told a 15-year-old girl that she provoked the person who cut her open. You finalized it when you let my savings be stolen and told me to start over. I did start over. I started completely over. And what I built without you. My mother was crying now. Quietly, in the way she always cried, with her chin tucked and her eyes down, like she was hoping no one would notice. My father was looking at me with an expression I had never seen on his face before. It took me a moment to identify it. It was something close to fear. Good, I thought. And then I thought, no, not good. Sad. It should be sad. That I am standing in my own apartment feeling something close to satisfaction at my father being afraid of me. That is not triumphant. That is the residue of damage. I need you to leave, I said. Please, my mother said. Just look at the records. Just see if there's anything that could be interpreted differently. You're so good at this. You always were. Even as a little girl you could look at numbers and just, Mom. I said it gently. I want to be accurate about this. I said it gently. Because she was my mother, and no matter what, that word still means something. I need you to hear me. I cannot help you. I will not help you. Please leave my home. My father stood. He straightened his jacket. And then he did something that I will never forget as long as I live. He looked at me, directly at me, and he said, You know this is going to destroy him. You're choosing that. I held his gaze. He chose it, I said. 4 years ago, when he started stealing. He chose it every single day for 4 years. I'm just not choosing to undo it. They left. I locked the door behind them. I stood in the middle of my living room for a long moment, and then I walked back to the desk, picked up the manila folder, and opened it. Here's the thing about forensic accounting that most people don't understand. We are, at our core, historians. We reconstruct what happened by following the evidence that transactions leave behind. Every movement of money is a sentence in a story. Every account code is a word. And if you know the language, you can read the whole narrative forward and backward, even when someone has tried very hard to erase certain chapters. 8 months ago, I had received an email from someone I didn't know. The sender's name was Marcus Webb. The subject line said only, I think you should see this. The email contained no text, only an attachment, a series of spreadsheets with a short explanatory note typed at the top. These came through a mutual contact who thought you might have reasons to care about what's happening at Hartwell and Associates. I don't know if you do. If you don't, please disregard. I almost deleted it. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe because something in me had always been waiting for the other shoe. Maybe because I had been in this field long enough to recognize, even at a glance, what those spreadsheets were showing me. The numbers had been massaged skillfully. I'll give him that. My brother had always been good with numbers when he was motivated. But there were tells. Duplicate vendor names with slightly different spellings. Expense line items that landed just below approval thresholds. A ghost subcontractor that had received 41 separate payments over 32 months but whose business registration address turned out to be a UPS store in a strip mall 40 minutes outside the city. I had spent 3 weeks going through everything in that attachment. And then I had compiled my own separate analysis, documented my methodology, and put it all in a manila folder that I placed in my desk drawer. I told myself I was holding it in case it became relevant. I told myself I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I told myself a lot of things. The truth, the one I have since told my therapist and sat with honestly, is that I was waiting. Not for revenge. I want to be careful about this, because revenge and justice are different things, and I had spent enough time with enough hurt people to know that confusing the two will hollow you out. I was waiting for the moment when I would need to protect myself, when they would come back and need something from me, and I would need to be able to say, I know exactly what happened and I have documented it, and this is not a situation where I am helpless. That moment had come on a Tuesday morning in March. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. Her name is Patricia, and she has represented me on various work-related matters for 4 years, and she is exactly the kind of person you want in your corner when the ground gets complicated. I told her my parents had just been to my apartment. I told her what they had asked. I told her about the folder. There was a brief silence on her end. Then she said, "Don't touch those records. Don't go near Hartwell. Don't communicate with your family again without running it through me first." "I know," I said. "I wasn't going to." "And the folder?" "I want to turn it over to the right people," I said. "Tell me who the right people are." She told me, and I listened carefully, the way I have always listened when the information matters. What happened next happened faster than I expected, and also in exactly the way I expected, which is to say by the book, deliberately, with a paper trail at every step. Patricia connected me with the company's external audit firm, who had already flagged irregularities and were conducting their own review. I submitted my independent analysis through proper channels. I provided a written account of my personal history with my brother, relevant to the question of motive and opportunity. I answered questions for 2 hours in a conference room with 3 people I had never met, and when it was done I signed a document and handed over the folder. My brother was placed on administrative leave 48 hours later. My mother called me 7 times in the following week. I did not answer. My father sent a single text message that said, "You have destroyed this family." I saved it in a folder on my phone labeled documentation, next to a screenshot of every text they had ever sent me asking for money over the years, messages I had quietly catalogued and never responded to, and never deleted. Because somewhere in the part of me that became a forensic accountant, I always understood that evidence is the thing that endures. I want to tell you about the morning I found out the charges had been formally filed, because it didn't feel the way I thought it would. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee and my laptop, and I saw the news alert come through, and I read it twice. And then I sat there for a long time looking out my window at the building across the street where someone had put flower boxes in on their 3rd-floor windowsill. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel relieved. I felt something that I would describe as a kind of settling, like a building after an earthquake, when all the disturbed things have finally found their resting places and the structure is still standing. I felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been braced for impact for a very long time and has finally been told they can put their arms down. I called my therapist. She asked me how I was doing. I said, "I think I'm okay." And then I said, "I think I've been okay for a while. I just wasn't sure I was allowed to say it out loud." She said, "You've been allowed for a long time. I want to talk about something that came up in the days after, because I think it's the part of this story that is most important and the part that gets left out of the versions people usually tell." After the charges were filed, a woman reached out to me through my firm's website. She said she was a colleague of my brother's, someone who had worked with him for 2 years, and she said she had suspected something was wrong but hadn't known what to do. She said she'd been afraid of looking disloyal. Afraid of being wrong. She said she'd watched the numbers not add up and told herself there was probably an explanation. I knew that feeling. I had spent most of my childhood telling myself there was probably an explanation for the things that kept happening in my house. That probably my mother was right and I had pushed him. That probably my father's silence meant something other than permission. That probably the empty bank account was, as my mother said, a temporary inconvenience, and I was being dramatic. I wrote back to that woman. I told her that the instinct to explain away the things that disturb us is not a character flaw, it is, in fact, a very human and very understandable response to the discomfort of knowing something that will cost you something to act on. I told her that she hadn't done anything wrong by waiting. And then I told her that the single most useful thing I had ever done with my own version of that feeling was to write it down. To document it. To create a record that existed outside my own head, so that when the moment came where I needed to be certain of what I knew, I didn't have to rely on memory alone. She thanked me. I don't know if it helped. My brother's attorney reached out to Patricia about 6 weeks after the charges were filed. There was apparently a discussion about whether I might be willing to provide a character statement not in his favor, but as a neutral party, someone who could speak to his childhood, his background, mitigating factors. I declined. I did it without anger, without explanation, with a simple 1-sentence response. I am not in a position to be a neutral party to this matter. My parents did not reach out again. I don't know if that is because they are too angry, or too ashamed, or simply because they have finally understood that I meant what I said. I hope it is the last one, not because I want them to feel pain, but because I think understanding is better than anger for everyone in the long run. I have spent a significant amount of time working through my own feelings about them, not to arrive at forgiveness in the way the word is usually used, as a kind of wiping clean, but to arrive at something more accurate. Something that says, I understand you were limited people. I understand you made choices from fear and habit and the particular blindness that comes from loving a child more than you love what is right. I understand all of that, and I am also allowed to protect myself from the consequences of it. Those two things can both be true. I spent a long time thinking they couldn't. There's a detail I haven't mentioned yet because I've been trying to figure out how to explain it accurately. When my parents first arrived that Tuesday morning and I let them up, there was a moment in the lobby I saw it on the security footage later because yes, I requested the footage. Because that is who I am, where my father said something to my mother that I couldn't hear. And my mother shook her head. And then my father looked directly up at the camera, which he knew was there because the doorman had pointed it out, and he did something very small and very deliberate. He straightened his jacket, like he was adjusting for the audience. I have thought about that image more than any other image from that day. Because I think it tells you something true about how certain kinds of manipulation operate. It is not unconscious. It is not accidental. It is a performance that has been practiced so long it looks like instinct. My father knew there was a camera. My father knew the footage might someday be reviewed. And my father straightened his jacket so that the record would show a man who was composed, reasonable, presentable. A man who came to his daughter's home with his wife and knocked on the door like a normal person and was simply asking for help. What the camera couldn't capture was everything that came before. The dish towel. The empty account. The newspaper page turning in the quiet. But I can. I am a forensic accountant. I reconstruct what happened by following the evidence that remains. And the evidence, the real evidence, the kind that lives in the body and in the documents and in the folders you keep without entirely knowing why the evidence has always told the same story. I left home at 17 with a duffel bag and $40. I built a life, slowly, in the way that things built carefully and without shortcuts tend to last. I became someone who understands how numbers tell the truth when people won't. And when my family came back after 7 years of silence to ask me to use that skill to protect the person who had never once protected me, I did the only thing that made sense. I told the truth instead. I want to leave you with something that I've been thinking about since all of this ended, or at least since this particular chapter of it ended, because I think these things don't really end so much as they change shape. A few weeks ago I was having dinner with a friend, someone I've known since college, someone who knows the whole story, and she asked me if I wished any of it had gone differently. If I wished my parents had been different people, or my brother, or if I wished I had left earlier or stayed or done something other than what I did. I thought about it for a long time, the way she asked the question, and I said something that surprised me as I said it. I said, I think the version of me who grew up in a safe house might not have been someone who learned to pay attention. And paying attention is the thing that saved me. Not once, but over and over, in ways both large and small. The attention I paid to the bank statement at 17. The attention I paid to the email from Marcus Webb 8 months ago. The attention I pay to my own reactions, to the specific weight of silence, to the moment when a voice breaks in a practiced way and the instinct rises to fix it. I don't think suffering is required for that kind of attention. I want to be clear about that. I don't think what happened to me needed to happen for me to become who I am. But it did happen, and I did become this, and the two things are related in ways I am still understanding. What I know is that the version of me who walked out of that house at 17 with her arm in a dish towel and $40 in her pocket was not broken. She was in the process of becoming someone who could not be broken, which is a different and more durable thing. I set my coffee cup down on the counter this morning. I looked at the flower boxes on the building across the street. They've added yellow ones to the red ones that were there before. I opened my laptop, and I went to work. The numbers always tell the truth if you know how to read them. That's what I do. That's what I've always done. That's enough.